Mr. President, what I wanted to do this afternoon was say a few words about the President's visit to NATO and the NATO meeting that we just had, and talk about the importance of alliances and our allies. And I think if you're reading the press now, I think overall you see this trip, to see the meeting, the President met with all the NATO leaders in Brussels, that overall it was a good trip. There's been this commitment by NATO members since at least 2014, but it really goes way earlier than 2014, for each country to spend 2% or more of their GDP on defense spending. So we share the burdens of defense. Now, the United States has essentially always met this target, easily met this target, but a lot of other countries haven't. And they've heard time and time again from presidents, and yet they've kind of ignored it. The success of this trip is that it looks like, for the first time really in years, NATO countries are moving away from cuts in defense spending. By the way, including the United States, from 2010 to 2016, we were cutting our defense spending, even though it was way above 2%, we cut it by almost 25%. We saw a huge drop in readiness, but we're changing that. But almost all NATO countries are starting to add billions of dollars of defense spending. And I think the President deserves a lot of the credit for really pressing this issue. Other presidents, other U.S. presidents have pressed it, and the Europeans have kind of ignored it, and it seemed to go away. President Trump stayed focused on it, and we're starting to see a shift. And I think he deserves credit. The President also highlighted a big national security issue that's in Europe that doesn't get a lot of attention, but it should get a lot of attention, and that's the issue of energy, particularly natural gas, and how Russia feeds a lot of Europe, particularly in this case Germany, and yet that undermines energy security and national security in Europe, in NATO. And it's a controversial topic. A lot of countries in Europe don't like the fact that Germany is spending so much to import Russian gas when NATO is actually focused on defending Europe against Russia. So I think the President also did a good job of highlighting this issue and how we need to focus on this. You know, Mr. President, you're seeing it. Some Europeans are protesting the visit of our president. But I will say this, and you don't read about this a lot, there's been no Western leader who's done more to undermine Western interests and Western national security and European energy security than the former Chancellor of Germany, Gerhard Schröder, the former Chancellor of Germany. He was the Chancellor of the German Republic, and when he left office, what did he do? He immediately went to work for Gazprom and Vladimir Putin to sell natural gas to European countries, including his own government, his own country, Germany. So, to me, that represents a remarkable betrayal of Western values, NATO security, European energy security. Doesn't get highlighted, but, you know, for our German friends, and they're our good, close allies, it's one thing to protest our president, but take a look at your former chancellor. He's doing more damage to the national security of Europe, the energy security of Germany, and our allies than probably anybody else in Europe. But the bottom line, Mr. President, this 2% this 2% GDP goal, this concern that we have with Russian energy into European capitals, these have been bipartisan concerns of Democrat and Republican administrations from the United States for decades, and I think this NATO summit, we're starting to see some good progress. The President ended the NATO meeting by saying, quote, "The United States commitment to NATO is very strong, remains very strong. In the spirit of countries willing to spend additional amounts of money is amazing to see. To see that level of spirit in the room of all the leaders is incredible." So that's what the President said today. And I think that was a good message to end this NATO leaders summit in Brussels. But Mr. President, I want to emphasize another point about our alliances, about NATO. It's also important to know that NATO is not just the sum of the amount of money that countries spend. That's important. There's no doubt about it. But this alliance, which many have viewed as the most successful military alliance in history, is a lot more than just money. At its heart, it's about common values. At its heart, it's about countries coming together to defend democracy. At its heart, it's about countries that have the same core national security interests. And Mr. President, this is very important. At its heart, it's about shared sacrifice. Shared sacrifice. Yes, there's shared sacrifice in the checkbook, but it goes way, way beyond this. It's very important to remember that Article 5 of the NATO Treaty, which is the treaty by which countries invoke the common defense. When you invoke Article 5, that means, hey, all the other allies are coming to help you. All the other allies are coming to defend you. Article 5 has been invoked in the NATO Treaty, which was passed by this body in 1949, one time. One time. When was it invoked? After the terrorist attacks of September 11th, 2001. Our NATO allies said, we're going to help defend America. That's really important. And they did. And they did. Again, we talk too much about dollars, and again, I commend the President for what he's done. But let's talk about other shared sacrifice. The alliances that we have around the world aren't just about money. Since 9/11, over 1,000 non-U.S. NATO troops have been killed in action in Afghanistan, coming to our defense after 9/11, going after the terrorists who killed over 3,000 Americans on 9/11. Over 1,000 NATO soldiers, non-American NATO soldiers, have paid the ultimate sacrifice because of the alliance they had with the United States. You can't put a price tag on that. You can't put a price tag on that. Some sacrifices are more than just dollars. Some sacrifices can't be measured in dollars. And I think it's important for all of us here in the Senate, for the Trump administration, and for all Americans to remember that. To remember that. And I want to thank the families of those over 1,000 NATO alliance member soldiers who've been killed in action. And by the way, Mr. President, thousands and thousands more wounded in action in Afghanistan, hunting down terrorists who killed our citizens. It's very important to remember that. Bottom line, Mr. President, when it comes to one of the most important and enduring strategic advantages we have anywhere in the world, it's this. We are an ally-rich nation, and our adversaries, like Russia, like North Korea, like Iran, and our potential adversaries, like China, are ally-poor. We are ally-rich. Countries trust us. Countries want to join alliances with the United States. And our adversaries and potential adversaries are ally-poor. And that system of alliances has been built over 70 years through the hard work of Democrats and Republicans, presidents, secretaries of state and defense, U.S. senators. That has been a joint collective effort. And here's something else that's important to know. Our adversaries and potential adversaries know that this is one of the most, if not the most important strategic advantage we have over any other country. And that is why for years, for decades, countries like Russia and China and Iran and North Korea have tried to split up our alliances. We shouldn't let that happen. We shouldn't let that happen. And it's important to remember this as we continue to deal with these countries. And I think that this NATO summit sent a strong message that we're going to stand together for decades more to come. And when it comes to alliances, Mr. President, this body in particular, pursuant to the U.S. Constitution, plays a very important role. The alliances that I've talked about, including especially this week NATO, came to the United States Senate for ratification. So again, it's important as we talk about national security and we talk about 2% and we talk about burden sharing, yes, we need that from our allies. But we also need to remember that our alliances go well beyond the checkbook. Common values, shared sacrifice, and sometimes that's the most important issue to remember as we continue to deepen our alliances and expand them throughout the world, which is the best way to keep peace and prosperity, not just for us, but for the entire world.